And that brings us to the glories of redistricting, which has been obsessively eating up time for a whole team of us since August. And there are now actual bill numbers for redistricting. The House, it's H 4493. The Senate, 865 by Rankin. That's for the Senate seats. And S 966 by Rankin for Congressional. And the team that has been working on this, I just cannot possibly say enough for these folks. John Roof has drawn our maps, and he is an acknowledged expert, respected in the Senate committees, I think somewhat feared in the House committees. He has worked very hard and has produced multiple drafts of maps. Shana Howell has done fabulous work organizing our advisory group and helping with our reporting to the state and to the federal, the National League. Matt Salzman has been doing a lot of very hard work on, along with Anna Marie Vagnosi, on sophisticated statistical analysis that has really gotten attention from the public and from legislators in some cases. But finding, for example, that of over 11.8 billion simulations of the House map, as it was debated on the floor of the House, only 407 out of more than 11.8 billion were worse, more extreme than the actual House map. And what that tells you is that the House is pretty much, if there were a gerrymandering Olympics, they would have gold medals all over themselves. Both parties were party to this. There were only 15 people who voted against that House map. At this point, just this past Thursday, the Senate passed a congressional map that is similar to a congressional map passed by the House. And what I'm going to do right now is turn this over to Matthew and Shana to talk about what they've done. And then I will wrap up with where we are on issues around litigation on this. So, Matt and Shana.
Good morning, everybody. So Lynn, I actually have there we go. I'm going to share a PowerPoint really quickly. Okay. Yes, Lynn has been really hard at work. I've told her I almost cringe sending her an email these days because I think she's up 24 hours a day working on redistricting. So I've been grateful to have an opportunity to work with her and learn from her. I know we have some people on our call who are very familiar with the process and maybe others who are coming in at the tail end of it. So I wanted to quickly recap just some highlights. In 2018, Matt was appointed to the LWVSC board as the redistricting chair. And then the next year, we formed the redistricting work group at convention, and Matt and I have been chairing it. This work group had the intention of helping bring local leagues together to allow each other to talk about what we were doing across the state and share resources and ideas and questions. And the leagues have done that. The local leagues have been, I think all but one or two had members on that work group, and they were all active in presenting to their local communities and staying engaged and talking with reporters and a whole slew of redistricting activities, including participating in census advocacy, getting people knowledgeable about that process and the impact that it would have moving forward. And then in 2019, we officially joined the LWVUS's People Powered Fair Maps project and underwent training with that. In 2020, Lobby Day was reintroduced, and boy, was I doing multiple double takes when I was putting together this presentation. I'm like, were we all together in February of 2020? It's amazing, right before the world sort of shrieked to a halt. But there we are on the steps of the State House. And in 2021, we had the census data release. Of course, it was late. The whole process was late because of COVID. And then later, right shortly after that, we released our recommended criteria. Actually, I think we did that before the census data was released. Our recommended criteria for redistricting, and we formed our redistricting advisory committee, which was made a nonpartisan committee with the hopes of sort of walking the talk. We had hoped, of course, many of you had lobbied, advocated for an independent redistricting commission in the legislature, which we did not get. And so we sort of formed our own to help advise our process. And this included representatives from nonprofits in the state, universities, former senators, representatives, people who really had an expert knowledge of redistricting and were able to share it with us. In 2021, as Lynn was saying, we really ramped up the work that we were doing. Lynn, several of us, I know we have people on the call who have been doing podcasts. I think, Lawson, the redistricting team out of Greenville did a podcast yesterday. This work is still ongoing, but we've been dozens of state and national news interviews. And part of that was set up by holding a training, a redistricting for journalists training early on in the year to just really help them understand what they were going to be looking for during the process, giving them the scientific background. It is a very complicated process. And a lot of our redistricting work group members participated in additional national trainings on Maptitude, which was a software that both the league and the legislature used to draw the maps. So a lot of people really went above and beyond in doing the work to really understand a very complicated process and be able to weigh in a very educated way. Matt and his team, including Vagnosi at Clemson University, were doing research on existing maps, so the maps that came out of the legislature in 2011, so that we were able to run comparisons on those. We knew that those maps did not exhibit extreme partisan bias, unlike the ones they put out in 2021. And this type of mathematical scientific comparison really allowed us to, I believe, have more legitimacy. We were able to say, despite some negative effects from, slight gerrymandering, these maps were not overly gerrymandered. And now we see that they are indeed. There were many presentations across the state, including local leagues collaborated on a statewide good government session on redistricting. But I know that, Lynn and Matt and John and I were given presentations across the state, and many of you were as well, helping educate your local communities and partner organizations. And that's another thing that we really did a lot of work with, is we had several close partners that we had routine meetings with. We collaborated with Women in Leadership on several presentations, and we are watching PR campaign to help notify people of what was going on as the redistricting work began in earnest. And like Lynn mentioned, her Making Democracy Work updates continued to go out to partners across the state who had previously shown interest in our voting rights work and been involved with that. And so she was really able to keep them up to date on something that often, in the past has sort of been pushed under the rug. We released our maps in September. We wanted to sort of get ahead of the legislative process so people could see what would a fair map look like. And of course, there are many different ways you can draw a map that would be considered fair, many different ways, for instance, to decide what a community of interest is. But these were maps that were drawn without looking at partisan interest or trying to protect incumbents or get rid of incumbents, as the case may be, as we know happens at the State House. And this is John Roof, who is our map drawer. We were incredibly lucky to have him on board. It's a lot of complicated work, and we couldn't have done it. We couldn't have done it without him. This was one of our proposed maps. So this is our proposed congressional map. It offered a lot less county splits than the current maps did. Really tried to keep communities of interest together. Here in Charleston, I'm in the Charleston League. I'm on Folly Beach, and boy, I love this map for keeping Charleston County together instead of splitting it all over the place to for the distinct purpose of getting rid of a competitive district like we see now. You can see our other proposed maps on the website. Again, I just want to echo what Lynn said. Mary Agnes, wow, has really the ability to have this information. You know, we have all of this information in our heads and we're seeing it, but her ability to get it out to so many people so quickly and so well, super thankful for. The maps were quickly submitted to the South Carolina House and Senate as soon as they opened up those avenues and became part of the public record. This is a picture of Lynn and John at a meeting I just happened to be at myself, the State House meeting that I was able to attend, but they attended very many and continued to up until just earlier this week. As a matter of fact, Lynn was there testifying on redistricting. And when I was there, we had national groups on from the ACLU and the NAACP, Legal Defense Fund, and it was really gratifying. You know, the Senate Redistricting Committee asked at those national groups at one point, the national attorneys, you know, what would you suggest on, you know, this issue? And they said, well, really, I suggest you download Dr. Roof's brain because he knows everything there is to know about redistricting in South Carolina. And it's true. So we're very lucky to have them on our team. And then again, we continue the analysis of maps when the House and Senate released theirs, and we were able to sort of make a solid mathematical case instead of one that could be labeled partisan. And that case clearly showed that we did have partisan gerrymandering issues in the House and the congressional maps. So I want to turn it over to my co-chair, Matt, right now. He's going to talk a little bit more about those details.
Okay, so where we are, and Lynn can jump in if I misstate anything, is the map of Senate districts has been adopted by the legislature and signed and is in effect and is not expected to be part of any litigation. The House map was adopted by the legislature, signed by the governor, and is in effect, but it is also the subject of litigation. The congressional map, this slide is a day out of date, so it has passed in the House. It was reported out of the Judiciary Committee on Wednesday, and I guess it was passed by the full Senate on Thursday. And then goes next to conference committee, but I don't think there are particularly many differences to be ironed out there. And then it will go to pass the legislature, get signed by the governor, and go into effect. And I suspect is likely to end up in court along with the House map, but Lynn would know better than I do about that. The parties to the litigation are the ACLU and the NAACP. We are not plaintiffs, but we are in contact and we're working with them on the suit as it goes forward. And then, briefly, I can show you pictures of the maps that are in effect. This is the Senate districts. The color patches are the districts. The heavy lines are counties. The lighter lines are precincts. And this was drawn in Dave's Redistricting app, which is a publicly available web-based tool for working on statewide maps of various kinds. And what you're seeing on the right there is a set of performance measures that that website automatically carries out on maps. And so the picture you can see there is there are 5 axes where there are different measures. The one that is particularly notable here further out is better. So the one that's particularly notable here is competitiveness, which isn't very far out at all. So that's where we are with the Senate. We can go to the next slide. This is the House. The color keys are the same. The overall performance is, as you can see, similar and even less competitive. And then here's where we were at the beginning of the week. There were 2 proposed congressional maps. The one that was reported out of the redistricting subcommittee is on the left, and one that was contributed by an Anderson County attorney and some people he was working with, and was proposed as an amendment, is on the right. And on the next slide, you can see the inner black line is the performance measure for the left-hand map, and the outer colored area is the performance for the map that's on the right. And so you can get an impression of how much better one could do if one was paying attention to trying to make a map that met the criteria that we are interested in here. So next. So we also ran, these aren't measures of partisan bias, we ran partisan bias analyses. Anna Marie Vagnazzi was my master's student and is now a lecturer in my department, and continues to do yeoman work running these analyses based on work in her master's thesis. The partisan bias question is how much are the overall maps tipped in the direction of one party or the other? The thing that we're interested in isn't so much the actual measures of those things, because the state demographics kind of dictate at least some of that, but we want to know for any particular map, how is it compared to other maps that we could have drawn? And so what we do is we start with the map that's proposed, and we draw lots of maps by changing those maps by small amounts. And we watch what happens to the relative measures of all the maps that we draw. The Senate map, what we found was, of the maps that we drew, 3 to 5% of them were more biased than the map that went into effect, which is not enough to really claim that it was intentionally gerrymandered. The House map, as Lynn reported, we only had a few hundred out of 11 billion sampled maps that were more extreme, and that's a pretty good indication that people were really trying to make a map this extreme. We ran the congressional maps, and we didn't get much of a useful result out of that analysis, and that's partly because it's just pretty easy to draw maps that are this biased for Congress. And so we want to ask a different question, which is, given a map that's proposed, how much better could we do on some of these measures? And you already saw in the comparison for the congressional maps that you can do a lot better than the map that is coming out. And so that's an indication, at least, that legislators are not thinking hard about trying to do better on those measures. So that's about where we are. And one thing I just wanted to mention is that right now the state mapping process is wrapping up, but local redistricting processes are going on right now in your counties and will follow in your municipalities. And so you still have an opportunity to influence how local districts are drawn. And that's also very important for what's going to happen going forward. And you can participate. I don't know if you can use these tools that are available online to do that local redistricting, but you can certainly go look at the maps and make sure that your communities of interest are protected.
Yeah, and I'll just wrap up really quickly. I want to thank everyone again for all of the work. I mean, it's been a huge effort across the state and across your local leagues. So we really want to say thank you. And you saw the slide before, what we lost. It was clear, and we knew it was going to be an uphill battle from the start, but we won a lot as well. We have a lot of increased credibility and visibility for the incredible amount of expertise that we have in the state and ability to come at things with a very educated, nonpartisan lens. We did get a decent South Carolina Senate map out of it. And I personally am very thankful that the process, even though it didn't end the way we would have wanted it to, it also did not take place behind closed doors. There was a lot of transparency, and people will understand a little bit better as we move forward why they're having the impacts in the voting booths that they're having. We'll be able to talk about that more. If you have any questions, this is Matt and I's email addresses, but again, thank you so much for all of your work over the past couple of years.
And I am just going to close by talking a little bit about the litigation. Sometimes people ask, well, are we doing an amicus brief? LDF attorneys have made it clear that if we wanted to do that, they would be supportive and helpful. That's great. But when you're in litigation, it constrains you a great deal. Plus, we are a small all-volunteer organization. And most important of all, we have great partners in LDF and ACLU who are doing what needs to be done in terms of litigation. These are some of the best folks in the country for civil rights issues around voting and elections, and they are already in court on both process issues and on the House map. Once the congressional map is signed, I think it's very likely they'll be in court on that too. We may be called as witnesses. They will almost certainly be referencing things that we submitted to help build the record.